Well, so this is Baruch here at the Tikkun Elevator Kollel. We've had some response, and we refer if you have comments and things that you would like to say, but the basic thing is this book needs to be bought. You need to buy the book. You need to send the book to your friends and relatives. That's how important it is. The question is, who's afraid of the Big Bang Jew? Now look throughout history and see what the Jewish people have accomplished. And then you start looking around and you say, well, we're hated everywhere. What's that all about? How bad can we possibly be to be able to stymie these poor little people like Hitler and the radical left and the jihad? How could it be that we're so big, so powerful, that they had to extend all of their hate to us? So here he says, learning to love the lessons of Jew hatred. There's a reason why we are hated so much. We represent humanity. We represent God in this world, morality in this world, and a direction which doesn't necessarily agree with Hamas. Let's come over here and let's see some more. But now, what I like to say is like this before we go on. This is chapter number 7, which is called Universal Lessons. Let me see if there's something right before it. Okay, so he writes, this is part 2. Part 2. Notice the small kippah he has on his head. He's a mighty, powerful guy with a Magen David. Don't bother me, man. You can't knock me down, but they sure can try. From understanding to action. So I'm going to say a lot of times that when I listen to, say, like a music album and the songs just really, really love, I just love them. They reach my heart, so to speak. And then the guy comes out with another album and it's not as good. So here we are in a second section. The first section really gave us an idea of why they hate us, what we represent. Hitler's the perfect example. Let's read on. I will bring them to my sacred mount, and let them rejoice in my house of prayer. For my house shall be called a house of prayer for all peoples. This is a quote from Isaiah. Now let me see how I can work my page out. Not bad. At the heart of our explanation, and you please read along with me if you would like, is the understanding that the Jewish journey reveals a profound truth. The most critical battles are played out not only in history, but also within the human heart. The fierce struggle is between our animal and godlike sides. In this internal war, every human being is a soldier whose choices are meaningful and impactful, both personally and collectively. The story of the Jews is about the struggle of all human beings to grapple with the human condition, reminding everyone of the importance of choosing between good and bad, light and darkness, and the spiritual and the material. And it's a struggle that every one of us have. This narrative underscores the tremendous potential inherent in life. In life itself, when we embrace the challenge of being human. And it highlights the positive impact our choices can have on ourselves and our world. In other words, what we are doing spreads. This enduring legacy, memorialized in the world's eternal best-selling book, still speaks to us today. The Jewish mission, rooted in millennia of spiritual pursuit, I think back 3,800 years, is a long time. Moral wrestling, trying to get a hold of your morality, and relentless courage to keep going on, contains valuable lessons for every individual, regardless of background or belief. The universal truths and wisdom to Judaism can help us understand the complexity of our lives. Beginning with Abraham, the body, soul, power, peace. Now, this is a phrase that the author has made up. He says like this, I'll read it again. Beginning with Abraham, the body, soul. Then he says the dichotomies, body and soul, power and peace, chance, God, fault line, and chance. things just happening by chance. God's fault line of human life was defined between these elements: body, soul, power, peace, and chance. Which side will be on? On the personal level, we can choose compassion, love, and how we relate to our fellow human beings. On a broader level, leaders, and nations will either improve human rights and increase peace or behave brutally, creating more trauma and war. Developing oneself into more refined, good, spiritual, and given person is the most basic level of Judaism, and it is universal. Everyone can do better. Everyone can grow. This is our life purpose. And while there are vast practical insights in Judaism to help, the Jewish people claim no monopoly on wisdom. People can learn valuable lessons from many different cultures and religions. Another important area, let me see if I get this down better, there we go. Another important area is standing up for truth, moral clarity, and against suffering. In the introduction, I mentioned how the Jews are likened proverbially to the canary in the mine shaft. With their heightened sensitivity to carbon monoxide, canaries were used in mines to warn miners of toxic conditions. When applied to Jews, the phrase "canary in the coal mine" suggests the threats to Jews serve as a broader warning to society that much greater danger is approaching. Now think about our time now. It's not entirely a mystical warning, although it's worth noting, with a touch of irony, that Jews are usually the first victims, but also a reflection of where a society and its values are holding and heading, and this is worrisome about the one in which we live. The Jewish condition is usually an accurate barometric reading of how a civilization is doing. Historically, when Jews have been allowed to live freely with few economic or other restrictions, which has been the case here in the United States, although it's led to tremendous assimilation. In those cases, the whole society has also been open, free, and successful. The opposite is also true when you try to control the narrative. This makes our story very relevant to all people. It means that anti-Semitism can and will affect everyone, not just the Jews. When anti-Semitism is exploding in the world, which it is right now, everyone should start worrying. The truth was profoundly seen in World War II and poetically articulated by the prominent German Lutheran pastor Martin Niemöller in 1945. This is what he said. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and no one left to speak for me. In the 1990s, the world watched with indifference as the Palestinians initiated the worst campaign of Islamic suicide bombing ever seen, with more than 100 buses and cafes blown up in a 3-year period alone, murdering more than 1,000 civilians. Then came 9/11. Suddenly the world was paying attention. The idea that ancient hatred of Jews is an early warning sign was true not only during the rise of Nazism and communism. It's still the case now in Europe, North America, and of course the Middle East, where a pandemic of hate is raging. After October 7th, 2023, Jewish students in America and elsewhere are being harassed and abandoned by campuses. Americans should be concerned not just for the Jews, but for themselves. Because when Jews are unsafe, it means that freedom and core liberal values are being undermined for everyone. Now he takes on some topics. Globalize the Intifada. In radical Islamic thinking, Israel is only the little Satan while the U.S. is the big Satan. This is the clear intent behind the cry heard at protests on campuses in cities worldwide. Globalize the Intifada. It signifies that violent Islamic jihad aims to spread to the U.S. and the West. The activists forming an unlikely alliance of radical Islamic and far-left agitators, professors, and students are not just calling for Israel to stop defending itself. They are advocating for an uprising to create fundamental changes in the U.S. regardless of whether their goals align more with Islamic Sharia or communist values. They are united in their disdain for the U.S. as evidenced by the burning of the American flags. A chance of death to America. If the radical Islamic Republic of Iran successfully builds a nuclear weapon, and they are on the brink of achieving this, the Jews are not the only people who will be threatened. Iran funds and trains proxy armors and militias abroad and is the world's largest supporter of terror. They can attack almost anywhere. The UN and government leaders watch and talk, or more accurately, blabber. However, the threat is not lost on Arab leaders as much as it is on Westerners, because they're right there. The approaching Shia Iranian nuke is such a threat to Sunni Muslims that it has already led several Arab states to normalize or make peace with Israel. They know better than the college professors that Iran won't hesitate to attack them or Europe or the U.S. if they can, if they could. As the ancient proverb goes, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and that is basically what's going on now. Hamas is the Muslim Brotherhood. They and other radical Islamists hate the Jews. But when they gain power, as we have seen in several regions, it's very bad news, just not for Jews, but for women, gays, and people of any religion. It's very bad for all human rights and freedom. The bottom line is that Jew hatred is not only a Jewish problem, it's an American and Western problem, as we need to fight it together. This means we need to strive for moral clarity on the face of evil. Sadly, in 2024, when pushed to choose sides once again in this epic human battle, many otherwise progressive people aligned with the death cult of the Islamic radicals. Just as so many Germans chose Nazism instead of respecting the sanctity of life. Clarity, intellectual and moral. But perhaps I am being too harsh and not judging favorably. Perhaps the social activists today are legitimately protesting for Palestinian self-determination and against the colonialist occupier fighting an immoral war, or they are just against war and concerned for the loss of life. How can we know if their intentions are pure? Admittedly, the Israeli-Arab conflict and the Hamas war are complex and confusing. While I am sure that some protesters are moved by honorable motivations, allow me to add some moral clarity by revealing the underlying bias of Jew hatred that is hidden behind the movement. We have noted that anti-Semitism morphs, sometimes appearing in the form of religious concerns. We killed Jesus. While other times it's about science. We are the lowest race. Or economics. We are too rich. Could much of today's anti-Israel fervor be Jew hatred in disguise? This time clothed in the garments of human rights and justice for Palestine. I would suggest that for anyone who knows, the activism does not pass the smell test. And when people say I am not anti-Semitic, I'm just against genocide, it rings hollow. The first clue that Jew hatred was alive and well in the global protest movement was evident when, within 24 hours of 1,200 Jews being raped and murdered, support began pouring out for the genocidal terrorism globally. As journalist Hadley Freeman wrote, there were anti-Israel protests before Israel had responded. That's all you need to know. 6 months later, this support had grown into the largest, most passionate, and best funded social justice protest movement since Vietnam. This was hard to understand and counterintuitive. Why was there such a strong reaction in support of the people that had carried out the cruel terror attack and against the people who had been slaughtered? How was there so much support for the Palestinians and against Israel when Hamas committed so many war crimes and were using their entire population as human shields by establishing all of their military infrastructure under and inside civilian neighborhoods, schools, mosques, and hospitals? How can we turn if this was a case of social justice warriors fighting for peace, justice, and human rights, or a well-organized and funded motley group of Islamists and progressives motivated by something less holy? Let's explore and analyze what have been igniting the passions and demonstrators worldwide. Question: why all support for Hamas? Could it be concern for Arab/Muslim lives? Were these protesters upset because of the deaths of Arabs or Muslims? If so, why did they mobilize only now and not when 2 million were killed and continued to be killed in Sudan, or when Syria's Assad massacred 500,000 of his own, some with gas, or when Saddam Hussein killed more than 1 million? Were the marches when hundreds of thousands of Muslims were killed in Yemen, Pakistan, and Afghanistan by their own? That the justice and tenement were only activated when Israel's war caused some 25,000 deaths, at least half of whom were terrorists, is suspicious. Concerned about war, maybe it was simply that the horrors of war got them so upset. It's so, then why did Russia's war against Ukraine, with an estimated 500,000 casualties since 2022, not evoke an international protest wave in campus and campus, as the Israel-Hamas war did? Sudan, Yemen, Syria, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Haiti? No, not any of them. Just Israel. Concern for an unjust war. Maybe it was not because Israel's war was morally unjustified while Russia's was not. Maybe the Israelis are colonialist occupiers and the Russians are not. No. Russia invaded the independent Ukraine. Israel returned to its ancient homeland. They had not been in Gaza since 2005, and the war was a response to a brutal and massive pogrom in an effort to prevent another one. As NYU Professor Scott Galloway said on MSNBC in April 2024, if Mexico freely elected jihadi leaders and then attacked the U.S. and killed 35,000 Americans and on the way home back took a few thousand hostages, what would the U.S. do? We all know that Mexico would be a parking lot. Concern for innocence? Maybe the passion was choked by a sense of injustice and concern about persecution of innocents. Or maybe the constant global attention was because so many civilians are involved. No. China has incarcerated more than 1 million Muslim Uyghurs in concentration camps and systematically abuses their human rights. And yet the campuses hardly raise a peep. And the media, in relative terms, almost and completely ignore them. It has certainly produced a global resistance movement. When the U.S. was fighting ISIS in Mosul, there was no parallel obsession with the number of civilian casualties. Concern for Palestinians. Maybe it is the global community's unique sympathy for the Palestinians. After all, they've been given more humanitarian money per capita than any other group on the planet over the past few decades and have special privileged refugee status that ensures the money keeps flowing. But if this is the core motivation, why did the world not accept them into their countries as refugees and save them from a war zone? Why, when Russia invades Ukraine in 2022, do 40 nations welcome 7 million refugees in humane generosity to provide safety? When war broke out in Syria, 6 million were accepted by dozens of countries between 2011 and 2016. But now in 2023-24, the world refuses to accept Palestinian refugees. In 2022 alone, 108.4 million people worldwide were first forcibly displaced as a result of persecution, conflict, violence, and human rights. But in the Hamas war, as Gazans were pleading to be let out, the global community rose as one, seemingly discovering a new moral principle exemplified by Secretary of State Antony Blinken's strange slogan, "No forcible displacement." After 6 months, only a few hundred Palestinians had been allowed to escape the war zone. Furthermore, there was no global outrage expressed for Palestinians when Jordan massacres thousands in the Black September of 1970, when Kuwait expelled 350,000 of them in 1990, when 125,000 had been displaced by the Syrian civil war since 2011, or when Hamas and the Palestinian Authority imposed Sharia law and took away the Palestinians' human rights for almost 20 years. Indeed, the entire Palestinian cause became cause célèbre only after 1967, when Israel regained the West Bank and Gaza. There was no concern, and certainly no global movement on behalf of the Palestinians to have a state of their own, or so long as Egypt and Jordan were controlling these territories. Only when Israel won the territories did the world start caring. Maybe intentional solidarity with South. He says this is concern for shared values. Maybe international solidarity with Hamas and the Palestinians is strong because of shared values between Hamas and some Western liberals. However, Hamas explicitly names genocide, the destruction of the entire state of Israel, as its primary goal, not say the welfare of its people, in its official charter, embedding this aim deeply into its culture. It is an internationally recognized terror organization and governed by Sharia law, which opposes most progressive values such as gay and women's rights. They systematically raped, violated, and murdered innocents on October 7th and openly said that they will do it again if given the chance. Yet, we see phenomena like Queers for Palestine, where LGBTQ plus activists march in support of Gaza on campuses hand in hand with Hamas supporters, despite the fact that their lifestyle would likely result in the death penalty if they visited Gaza. Women's rights groups remain silent in the face of systematic rape, and progressives rally behind one of the planet's most illiberal and oppressive cultures. This is almost as morally absurd as a movement of cows for McDonald's. Hamas's main patron is Iran. Now, the world has changed since this book was written, but you see the dynamics have not gone away. The world's largest supporter of global terror, along with allies like Russia, Turkey, Qatar, and North Korea. In contrast, Israel is a liberal democracy and a close ally of the United States. When the leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, writes a letter of solidarity and produces a YouTube video praising campus activists for their being on the right side of history and for creating a new branch of the resistance front, it's a clear signal to question which side you are aligning with. Only one answer remains. If none of these reasons explain why the Hamas war gathered so much political and media attention and sparked a global protest movement, then what does? could be unique about the Hamas war that ignited such widespread passion, if it wasn't due to the scope or nature of the conflict? A deep concern for Palestinians, shared values. Then what could be the common denominator? Only one answer remains. It's the Jews. Now the answer is anti-Semitism. As the Wall Street Journal's editorial board observed, only when it can damage Israel does it become the liberal position to close the borders and keep refugees penned in a war zone. This starkly highlights that it wasn't just Hamas cynically forcing their own people to remain in danger as human shields. The global community also conspires to lock them in, leading to the deaths of, quote, innocents, and creating a humanitarian crisis, subsequently blamed on the Jewish state. Israel defends itself using the most careful tactics ever seen in modern warfare, even as they face an enemy that commits more crimes against humanity than perhaps ever seen in modern times. Despite these efforts, Israel is accused of committing genocide. John Spencer, chair of urban warfare studies at the Modern War Institute at West Point, has repeatedly highlighted the unprecedented efforts the IDF makes to protect civilians. And yet, students protest, professors lead demonstrations, schools close, the UN condemns, the ICC investigates, and the deal for justice just boils over when Jews are involved. Even ISIS, beheading its way across the Middle East, did not generate anywhere near the level of opposition from progressive activists. Make no mistake, the double standards reveal the Jew hatred. The strongest social justice process movement since Vietnam proves it. If you still don't see it, the calls to kill Jews and eliminate Israel, often heard at these pro-Palestinian rallies, this should tip you off. Now, let me see, we're getting very close to the end, and we're going to finish this. The question here, he writes in bold, is, will we be silent? And that's the reason why you need to buy this book. You need to buy the book, you need to give it to people. You need the people who care about what's going on in the world, because it's only going to get more directed. It's going to get worse. The Arabs are the type of people that like to stick it in your eye type people. They'd rather do that than do something functional. We're not familiar with this. This is not American. This is something different, another mentality. Different worldview altogether, based in some way on Islam. During World War II, much of the world lacked moral clarity, turning a blind eye, and many non-Germans assisted, as 6 million European Jews were slaughtered. Today, Israel fights a relentless war against forces that threaten not only the Jewish people, but also American and Western civilization. Radical Islamists openly declare that their primary enemy is the U.S., not Israel. Yet Israel is condemned by the international community. Remaining silent now would be another colossal failure of our collective moral duty. Now, you have to love this because he's not being silent. If you think about the name of this book, Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Jew? You realize that it's a very bold thing to say. Whoever sticks up for Jews, whoever said that the Jews are powerful. As Elie Wiesel said at his 1986 Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech, we must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. Sometimes we must interfere when human lives are endangered, when human dignity is in jeopardy, national borders and sensitivities become irrelevant. Whether men or women are persecuted because of their race, religion, or political views, that place must, at that moment, become the center of the universe. In June 1961, the State of Israel put Adolf Eichmann on trial for being one of the chief Nazi architects of the Holocaust death machine. Yehiel Denur, who was one of the few survivors who encountered Eichmann during the war, was called to testify. He began describing planet Auschwitz, a place where the time there is not the same. The time there is not the same as it is here on Earth. And the inhabitants of this planet had no names. They had no parents and no children. They did not wear clothes the way that people wear clothes. They were not born there and did not give birth. They did not live according to the laws of the world here. And then Denur collapsed. He never finished his testimony. It took 6 months in the hospital before he was able to stand again. A few years later, when asked whether it was fear or horrific memories that overwhelmed him at the moment in front of Eichmann again, he replied that it was none of the above, but the realization that Eichmann was just an ordinary man. Here you have the picture of the Noor. Then it was clear to me that Auschwitz is not another planet, as I thought before. Auschwitz was not created by the devil, nor by God, but by man. Hitler was not a devil. You could enter a kindergarten, almost 50 children. There was one child named Adolf Hitler. Among those 50, he was a man. Denur understood the terrifying truth that regular human beings can choose to be evil. Hitler was human. Like everyone else, man can become an animal, or man can reach the heavens. We can choose to make a difference. Although our world certainly has much room for improvement, it continues to make progress. It is within the gap between the world that it is now and where it needs to be that we can all make a difference. This is the Jewish message to every human being. We are spiritual beings in the physical body and world, and as souls we can choose life. We can make a difference and elevate the material to achieve self-transformation by fixing ourselves, by a person. We can also be a light to the world. Russian Red Army war correspondent Vasily Grossman witnessed the higher side of humanity when he saw the liberation of the Treblinka death camp in 1944. After hearing numerous stories of spiritual resistance, he wrote like this: "Great is the power of humanity. Humanity does not die until humanity dies. And the beast who slays the man remains a beast. And this immortal spiritual strength of human beings is a solemn martyrdom, the strength of the dying man over the living beast. Therein, during the darkest days of 1942, lay the dawn of reason's victory over bestial madness, a good over evil, light over darkness, an awesome dawn breaking over a field of blood and tears. The beast and the philosophy of the beast foreshadowed the end of Europe, the end of the world, but the people remained people." There's a philosophy out there called Nazism, but there are people. The Jewish quest to harness human potential lies in the revelation that choices are real and change is possible. It's an idea that remains deeply controversial thousands of years later, as genetic research, evolutionary psychology, mass movements, and the fatalism of an impersonal universe chip away at our sense of personhood, identity, control over our lives. What in Judaism implores of all of us is to live consciously of our choices, because these choices can change everything. That ethos, a quintessentially Jewish one, now permeates the civilization that we live in. Bringing choice into the world is inherently disruptive. So now we have Donald Trump. It endows life with meaning and purpose, creates conflict, unearths the past, forces us to confront the future, and tells us that we do not just exist. We have the ability and responsibility to shape ourselves and our world. We can all be lights. The Jewish story is meant to inspire everyone. It's really a story for everyone. Just as Let My People Go became a rallying call for every oppressed group, Choose Life calls us to realize our potential. The Jewish journey is from slavery to freedom, from darkness to light. It's not a solitary path, but a shared voyage towards universal peace, respect, and divine awareness. The Jewish story serves as a metaphor for the human family, illustrating both man's inhumanity to man and our inspiring resilience as we strive for a brighter future. Let's all choose life. So says the author, Rabbi, let me get his name out here, Rabbi Raphael Shore. This is Baruch Fleischman. You've been listening to a book we want to promote, eyes we want to promote. Be strong, Jewish people. Be resolute in your faith. This is the Tigran Elevator Kolo.